Okay, so the topic of discussion today is the potential use of artificial intelligence in interactive storytelling. There's so much excitement over AI applications these days that we seldom, or that it is very tempting to believe that there will be useful AI applications for interactive storytelling. I maintain that AI as it currently exists will never play a significant role in interactive storytelling. And here is my reasoning. The current fad in AI is the chatbot and the art creators. And these are certainly surprising, and they do some very interesting things. There we go. But in fact, they're damn good. There's just no doubt about that. But I don't think they are in any way applicable to interactive storytelling. That's because the way they work, in each case, they grab up this huge database of stuff from the internet. For example, in the case of the chatbot AI, they just grab up an enormous amount of text. I'm sure there's some sort of selection going on. I very much doubt they want to grab text from BBS discussions. Otherwise, their output would be full of nasty insults. Yeah. But so they have this huge database taken from the internet, and then they have ways of tagging various components of it, of recognizing, okay, this is talking about slide rules, and this is talking about calculators, and that's talking about onions, and this is talking about hydroelectric facilities, so forth. And then when you engage this chat bot, whenever you say something, it searches through that and finds appropriate fragments and puts them all together, and that's its response. Actually, this worked very, very well with an early version of it that mimicked scientific papers, because scientific papers are so rigorously, the structure of them is so rigorously defined, they all follow a very similar pattern. And so it was very easy for them to tag the components of these papers, and then to tag them with the content. And this one is talking about physiology, that's talking about kidney failure, this talking about planetary atmospheres, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, that worked very well. In fact, it managed, I believe, I read a number of stories about it, one of which did say that they produced a paper that was initially plausible. You know, it actually read like a real scientific paper. The only problem was, if you knew anything about the topic, it was gobbledygook. But if you didn't have the technical expertise, it seemed like a scientific paper. The chatbots themselves, or the latest chatbot is very good, but it still has its flaws. Just 2 days ago, a friend of mine, I believe it was Gonzalo Alvarez, I believe, sent me some, in fact, do I still have that? No, I don't see, oh, no, don't see it. Sent me screenshots from his conversation with this chatbot, in which it just mentioned that this particular piece of educational software was created by Chris Crawford. And he asked me, did you create this? And I mean, it doesn't look at all like anything I've ever done. And I said, oh, and we both did a lot of searching on various phrases in the chat box comment, trying to figure out how it came to this conclusion. We were unable to figure it out. This is a good example of the way these AIs sort of randomly stick things together. Somehow it just decided, software, design, entertainment, education, this thing here, Chris Crawford, maybe it'll put somebody else in next time. Anyway, with the art drawing images, it's very interesting. They can do magnificent work so long as it is so long as what you request is closely tied to a lot of images on the internet. And in fact, it will drift, whatever you ask for, it will drift in that direction. A beautiful example of this, I read an article yesterday, and in it, lady, the author of the article complained that she had given her face to a photograph of her face to a system. You pay them $8 and it'll generate 8 nice cartoon-like watercolor images of you based on that photograph. She showed the thing and the result, and it shows this really cute girl with lovely curls and wearing a very low-cut dress with big breasts and so forth. A classic soft porn kind of image. And she said, I don't look like that at all. Well, what it did was it took her face and then compared it to its stock of female faces. And on the internet, not many people post drawings or images, I should say drawings of, ugly old women. If you're going to post some artwork of a woman, it's going to be a young woman, voluptuous, blah, blah, blah. And so it drifted in that direction. If it doesn't, it's funny, if you give it a face, it'll do a pretty good job with a face. But if you give it something else that includes faces, then it will, but you don't specify faces, it produces some pretty monstrous looking heads. There were
I did one last night and I gave it the prompt, Paul McCartney and Kiss makeup. And I posted a link to what it generated, and it is definitely nightmare fuel.
Okay, I'm bringing that up. One other thing.
Yeah, I have a few things to add here from our work last month. A particular issue with Arthur is that you're doing a pretty distinguished aesthetic on historical realism for 6th century, which at best, like we got the Clive Owen movie, that was a sort of more historical Arthur. And that, so there aren't a whole lot of references, and there are assumptions in other people's art styles or in architectural history through multiple centuries or like 3-century units where things are kind of noticeably different. And we're dialing that back 2 times before what usually you associate with Middle Ages. And that was a particular challenge. So one way to deal with that would be to train your own model only on a set of hewn images from that time period. We did a lighter version of that where you're giving me lots of references and I was blending them and reblending them with the descendants, like Habsburg style breeding. And some of that work basically that was the only way I could accomplish what you wanted, was to reference the guys wearing kind of rags and scale mail, because you just can't everything put in armor. And if you say no armor, it puts in even more armor. So negative prompting, where you have a negative tag next to a word is a thing that exists, and Midjourney doesn't support it yet, but I'm sure they will sometime soon, because it's kind of a standard thing. And that in particular saying like none of these things that are explicit anachronisms that were fight, but it was a pain in my ass to get around that in this iteration. So that is true, but it's not insurmountable. Is my point.
Yeah, Patrick and I both spent a lot of time. He was on Midjourney and I was using DALL-E, which is inferior, but spent a lot of time trying to get any kind of useful image to use in Le Morte-d'Arthur. And the problem, as he has pointed out, is this drift thing where we're specifying this is what we want, and it just drifts towards what it has a lot of. And so especially when we talked about soldiers, we kept getting knights in shining armor. No matter what we tried. I mean, we did all sorts of variations, and it was always knights in shining armor.
No, eventually we did get some very good, like 6th century Saxon looking, like guys yelling and wearing it for grid. But it was because we pulled in those references and we thickened that in.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a bias. The biases are tough to fight, but that's also because Midjourney is a generic model that's meant to be your sort of a Pizza Hut salad bar kind of experience.
Yeah. So it was another thing we've noticed is that many times we get hands with 6 fingers. That's a very common experience because again, these AI systems, they don't know anything about the real world. All they know about is images. And when they see images of hands, they see lots of little cylinders. And so, okay, we'll put some cylinders in there. They don't realize that there's supposed to be a certain number. Anyway, that's why it won't work with interactive storytelling. For example, if we were to build such a system for interactive storytelling based on knowledge of lots and lots of stories, we would get just a lot of fragments that don't make any sense. The classic example of this might be the literature that Snoopy created in the cartoon column Peanuts. Suddenly a shot rang out. There are just all these fragments of stories that are common, and we see lots of this stuff, and no matter what you put into a story generator, it's going to drift towards that. Now, as Patrick insinuated, it should be possible to confine the database to one class of storytelling. A good example would be soap operas. There are zillions of these. If somebody could get a hold of the scripts for all those TV soap operas, they'd have a gigantic database from which to work. Even then, though, I am very dubious, very skeptical that such a system would be useful, because causality is a fundamental component of storytelling. An event that happens must happen for a particular dramatic reason. And when you're just grabbing bits and pieces of stories, you destroy the causality. And another aspect of this is that stories have very complex structures. I think we all underestimate the complexity of storytelling. But if we do not, but I doubt that we're going to be able to reconstruct those complex structures using a system that just grabs bits and pieces and sticks them together. So I am not at all optimistic about the use of this generation of AI in interactive storytelling. Yes, in the future, if we go to a new generation of AI based on something else, it's theoretically possible. But at this time, I see no reason to believe that AI will play any role in interactive storytelling. That's a very strong position. And so I'm opening up the floor to outraged contradiction.
I mean, I'm obviously more of a techno optimist about this than you are. I will say that I don't think we're going to get AGI, world-changing hard takeoff out of large language models. It is interesting that they don't fully understand everything about how a large language model works itself. It's got so much recombinative splurging output that it's actually very valuable for the researchers to get, even if you subsidize it with VC money and pay for the hosting, or Google offers you some hundreds of thousands of GPU credits to burn through. You want to get people just prompting it in order to continue generating synthetic data to feedback and train it. And so it's a lot of that. It's kind of like we're fucking around with atomic energy in a way, and that there's this risk factor, but that we haven't, maybe we haven't found the deuterium or tritium of, you know, fuel essentially to have like a really strong recombination. So anyway, meanwhile, is this going to allow us to make entertainment more cheaply? I mean, I think we got some really nice images. In my version of L'Amour d'Arthur, I would include more images than maybe you would. But, and you know, whatever, play around with styles a little more. But I like it that we got a nice prestige.
I have to admit that I had very precise specifications.
Yeah, and the purity of form that you are hewing to is foundational. So everything is a derivative of that, and that's what purity is great for, right? Is it sets up a new ground of reference for art. So I think so I agree with your choices, such as with Merlin. We did a lot of Merlin faces, and we were trying to get it to the Arthur. I think since Merlin is a spirit, a Merlin with stable diffusion, trippy shifts in appearance is kind of interesting. And you could possibly even take that video and have it cast to an animation that will like lip sync, you know, it'll track and lip sync it and whatnot. So there's things to play with there. And these are all low effort, low hanging fruits with a reasonably low unit cost of experimentation. If you were paying for the GPU, you might spend, you know, tens or hundreds of dollars if you were doing a lot of animations, because there's a lot of, you know, minutes of generating. So it gets more expensive with animation. And so I have experimented a little bit with animation back in November. I got the two monkeys sharing a cigarette and blowing smoke in the other one's face. And I thought, oh, that's kind of funny. That's a little bit of whimsy in the animation that I didn't quite plan. And it came out just by the blend and tweaking the stability to about 0.83, 0.82 is like the sweet spot. If you guys want to try it. So with a VC guy that I've been like moonlighting for, because I've been on the sell side for so many years. So it's really funny to get on all these calls and hear people BSing and trying to raise money. It's like, it's almost like it's like fake business, you know, when Tim Dillon calls up the realtors and he's not going to do the thing. Because most VCs, you know, it's fake business. They'll talk to you and they won't invest. So we talked to this one company called Pollinations. They have this tool, pollinations.ai. That's pollen with an I. It's a little weird spelling. So you guys can look that up. They have a couple animation tools that are free to use, and they're using their Google credits. So that's available to everybody. And like I can't help but think that like Revolution Diabolique would be great to get a treatment like we were doing for Arthur. And I think that it's something that indie developers should use to generate art assets. I got into scenario.gg on the beta, and this is specifically training. So you can take Midjourney concept images as your rootstock and then work with their model training to give you things that form fit, you know, like 2D grid cuts and tile cuts and things like that, that you would need for, you know, a grid-based game. Since we're in a graph-based model with the directional acyclic graphs of Sweepweave or the way LMD is designed, concept images or concept animations for each encounter makes a lot of sense, and you can be very artistic and abstract and kind of go all over the place even, and it works artistically. Whereas with the 2D game, shooter, strategy, etc., or an RPG that blends the two, so you could put these elements into an RPG, have your grid-based spatial stuff generating encounters, and then you know, I think that works. I didn't use Novel AI last month because I just didn't have time and energy, and like was exhausted after the holidays. But I decided when I did have the opportunity the other week not to bother really, because of kind of what you're saying, Chris. Like, I just figured it'll be easier for me just to write some stuff before I go all into like telling the AI all the lore that I want to architect. And I'd rather focus on designing the graph of the story world before I really worry about the writing.
Patrick, Craig had a comment he wanted to make. So
no
I'd
worries.
like to give him a chance here.
No worries.
Okay,
I
sure.
figure we'll hit the rest house. No, the thing that I noticed with Novel AI is that it really has no concept of certain types of objects in the games, or sorry, the novels that it's trying to produce. So I had one last night where it was me and observing a wizard fighting a dragon. And so being the idiot that I am, I decided I was going to eat the dragon. And through various different things, I managed to kill the dragon through non-conventional means. And then so the wizard's like, oh, you know, we need to do all this stuff. And I said, I disappear. And suddenly I'm in this room with mirrors, all looking at myself, and I'm like, break the mirrors, you know, and then just, you know, I was basically messing with the game, and it could not understand or cope with any of the things that I was doing in there. So if you're going for some kind of weird, you know, Dreamhounds of Paris, Lysurgia, weird subversive type tales or what, this is going to be fantastic. But it has no concept of the difference between an apple, which you eat, an Apple computer, which you type on, or the apple of the Garden of Eden, which you kicked out of God's presence and whatnot. So there's no idea of all of this stuff, and no way, I think, for them to really imbue all of that in there the same way that we imbue that.
That brings, I'm sorry, were you done? That raises a very important, a fundamental point, and that is truth obtained solely through empiricism or through the abstraction of empirical data into principles? And I would argue that it's the latter. And the AI systems we're looking at now do exclusively the former. They just take a pile of data and just fiddle with it. It's the purest form of empiricism, but it doesn't make any attempt to extract abstract principles from the mass of data it has accumulated. And it's funny, I first remember this, gosh, there were some fellows at Skywalker Ranch, the Lucasfilm place, who came to Atari around '83 and gave a lecture on some things that they were attempting to do. And it was the same basic concept of pure empiricism, and we are not going to try to write any principles into this. Now, the earliest AIs from the 60s through the 80s and even into the 90s, before the internet really took off, those AIs were all based on principles. That is, you didn't have that much data, so you somehow tried to express your principles in algorithms, and that never quite worked. There were some very interesting things that were achieved with those AIs. They were capable of doing some impressive low-level stuff, stacking objects in such a way that they wouldn't fall, the stack wouldn't fall over. But again, that's really low-level thinking. And so the fundamental question here is, are we smart enough to be able to take the ideas we want to express and express them in algorithmic form? And so far, the evidence on that is very negative. So we're all going to
yeah, I think we should try to work in this DAG option weighting format that Sweepweave does, which is a static handcrafted format of a different modality from going and making like a big dialogue tree laden like old school RPG, but it's, you know, it's like going in a different direction. I think something like Facade 2.0 in the future will be possible, and that future might be only a few years away, and whatnot. There's a lot of things to try, but like, yeah, I mean, we want to like set, I mean, you're setting a benchmark here. I want to try to like take that a little further. I'm going to use AI art and AI animation to make it more sellable and more commanding and more attention as a spectacle, because I think that people respect that at some level and vibe with that. And that's, you know, and that's a baby step next. So, I mean, I think it's also more interesting maybe to talk about the craft of story worlds a little bit, because that's also something we've been iterating on.
Oh, Hanil here has asked a question about Storytron. Wasn't that story idea plot in algorithmic form, even though the creation was complicated? It did not, the Storytron technology did not impose any algorithmic forms on the progress of the story. In fact, the technology did not produce any algorithms. It permitted the author to create algorithms. And those algorithms were fairly simple. They were character reactions to events. And so my belief was that this was a low-level algorithm that was easy to understand and therefore create, that when combined with many other of these low-level algorithms would produce an effective story. Again, the problem was that people had too much, creating these algorithms, even these low-level algorithms, turned out to be just too much work. There were just too many details that had to be brought into conformance with each other. And no matter how hard I worked, I kept coming up with flaws in the system where it would contradict itself, or if I kept it simple enough, it would be boring. It wouldn't do interesting things. So in order to get interesting developments, I had to get into algorithms of great complexity, which I found beyond my reach. So yeah, the Storytron approach might be in the long run the best one. It may be that over the course of cultural evolution, the weakness that people now have in creating algorithms will be diminished. That is, people will learn to think in terms of algorithms. Right now, this is one thing I have hammered away at with students. You've got to learn to use math to express your ideas. And I have run into a very solid, high brick wall in those attempts. People absolutely refuse to learn even simple math. The math I've always used in my algorithms is just first year high school algebra, not even that, no quadratic equations. So we have a serious problem right now. It might, if the civilization lasts long enough, we might overcome it, but this is something that will take generations to do. We've seen this kind of thing with other things, the effect of writing on thinking and so forth. So
More like
I have some thoughts on StoryTron because I built something with it and I play tested that, and so I'm familiar with the working environment, and that was not horrible. It wasn't maybe as powerful as, like, I don't know, StarCraft editor or whatever, but so this is like the lack of the thickness in it. But like I set up this office sim where you're like an ISO auditor and you go in and interview people for your audit. It's like the most boring thing, and they were kind of very like perspective about it. And I think that we got over a fence on IP licensing and things like that, right? And then they kind of backed off, but it didn't really go anywhere, which was unfortunate. And so what I was trying to do with that basic example was give people a sense of a few inclinations. So obviously going and be polite to people, you're gonna get better responses and unlock some things. That was like a really basic one. And then just asking the right questions. That could have been souped up, but I was trying to do a few basic things to showcase the core idea. And then I think what's interesting artistically about L'Amour d'Arthur is that there's a persuasive game sort of essay element inlaid into it. So a really simple example would be like Gonzalo Frasca's game September 12th. The kind of the main essay point is you figure out that blowing people up makes more terrorists. Stop doing it to get the terrorism down. And then you go, oh, the war on terror is bad, right? And here you're doing a few things. There's the relationship management with the kinglets. There's the inevitability of Mordred. You can't actually improve the relationship. You can put your head in the sand, or you can fight them up front, or something in the middle. And there's the right and better way to do that, the wrong way. So there's a few things, but it's mostly about 3 or 5. There's not even like maybe Gwen can cheat. You didn't put that in because that's later day legend. You want to keep it really kind of rustic, right? Which is cool. So you simplified it, and you allow people to meditate on a few key things that they can shift around and tip over vis-a-vis, sort of an inclination algorithm formula. And maybe the problem with Storytron was the consequentiality of every single inclination formula vis-a-vis, because right. And so here you're kind of embracing the mundanity of the everyday. It's like a Sopranos or maybe James Joyce kind of vibe of letting people soak into it. You don't see the consequences of every little encounter when Arthur's walking around chatting with people. And that is the flavor of the game. And so one thing that was good about your edit recently, based on your data, getting the front part out, and I think you put it a little later, is you have them chatting with Mabon and then you have them chatting with Guinevere. So it's like, oh, this is a game about talking with women. That's a little different, right? So that orients you in a mechanical sense of what to expect, I think, pretty well. And then you start talking with the man and the plebs, and you're trying to be magnanimous, and you're like, oh, I'm the man. I'm Arthur. How do I role play Arthur? It's a role playing game. I get that. There's going to be some consequence to what I say to people.
Patrick, Chris Connolly is requesting. So Chris, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I guess I would say that, like, Storytron, as far as the difficulty of authoring in it, it was more about the difficulty of just creating all of the like data that it needed to run, like all of the verbs and all of the inclination equations for all of them, and the personality models and how that played into their decision making. It was just like a ton of information that the author needed to input. And maybe that kind of thing is something that could be assisted by AI in the future. And that could even get around with what you were saying, Chris, about people not wanting to dig into the math. I suspect a lot of people will just use AI and suggest what they want to create, and then just whatever the system gives them.
Okay, how about the idea of narrow AI? That is, what if we were able to produce an AI system for just character reactions to events? I'm not optimistic about this, but I have to bring up the possibility. That is, what if we focus exclusively on the problem of how a character reacts to dramatic events? that
Mhm.
it might be possible to extract data on that from the internet. Thoughts on this problem?
Maybe. I think the value right now, at least, is to have an AI assistant for creating the handcrafted content, at least anytime soon. It seems like that's where the real value in these AI tools is, just to let you produce the same stuff you were producing on a much higher rate.
Okay, that raises a very valuable point. Someone earlier in the chat mentioned the case of the Reddit, the artist who had posted his image on Reddit and was accused of using an AI image generator. And among artists, this is a heinous mortal sin, and he was thrown out of the Reddit area for committing such a heinous crime. My own take on this is that artists right now are being, the artists who create images are being Luddites. They do not want to accept the new technology, and they're just wrong. That technology isn't going away. It's only going to get better. And so what they need to do at this point is learn how to use the tool, treat it as a tool that they can use and make better output with. I'm
I think
wondering.
that's a bit harsh, actually, calling them Luddites, because I know an artist and he's very much opposed to it in the sense that his work is being scraped. So David Rebois, he's an artist. He puts all of his stuff out under a Creative Commons license and that. So basically all people have to do is give him attribution and they can use it however they wish.
Yeah.
In France, they also have the concept of moral rights in that, which we won't get into, but that's,
Oh God.
yeah, because we're in the United States and morality is just one of those things. It's just a nice seasoning. So he's upset that his stuff. So if you go on to Stable Diffusion, you could say something like paint such and such in the style of David Rebois, and it will give you something very, very close to his stuff. I did one, was the King in Yellow in the style of Pepper and Carrot, and it came up with some really interesting things that were very close to his style. So I think it's more that they're being scraped of all of their stuff and being put into a really weird science experiment that they did not consent to do. And so that's the main issue that I've seen with that.
Let me point out that this is a universal characteristic of all art forms. For example, cinema. These people learn from each other all the time. That is, here's this movie that comes out and somebody else creates, is influenced by it and produces a movie that has similar elements. And in fact, we get this is an accepted part of the development of cinema. Just a second, let me let the dog out here. There you go, dog, go see. With music, Beethoven had a huge impact. That is, lots and lots of people of later composers were influenced by Beethoven's work. And this goes all through the history of music. An innovator comes along, comes up with new ideas, other people learn from it and change the way they produce art in order to, or in reference to that. Literature, singing styles, the way you get genres developing, how you'll get in pop music, you'll get a group that comes along and has an interesting style and people start copying it.
Well, literally. So one of the things that this is tracing back to is the history of sampling in music, where people will take a little bit of a piece of music and incorporate it in a new piece of music.
Yep.
And unfortunately, we've also gotten to the point where copyright comes into all of this lovely stuff and ruins everyone's fun. So you have an album like Paul's Boutique by the Beastie Boys, which literally could not be replicated nowadays because you could not pay enough money to get the sample clearances for all of it.
Yeah, and I think that just kind of says that copyright really doesn't work for art. like especially for music. And the reason that it's so strong in that industry is because like all of the rights are basically owned by the record companies, and they have huge budgets to spend in lawsuits for years and years.
Yeah.
Agreed.
So we've got this interesting problem that in previous work can morally be, you can be influenced by previous work. Your own work can reflect concepts in previous work, but this is where Craig's friend comes in. Can they actually copy the data, the empirical results of their work instead of the principles? Well, in the style of an artist is really more of a principle. Style is not data, but style is principle. But can we really get away with saying, well, with enough data, it becomes principle?
Yeah.
I agree there is a serious issue here. My argument is not so much moral as pragmatic. That is, come on, guys, you're not going to win this battle. You might as well just accept that and use it to your best advantage.
Well, and I'll note there's still a place in a production budget for hiring an animator or hiring an artist, even if they're touching up Midjourney fingers, and they can do more than that. They can photo bash. They can do a lot. They can actually do a lot with these without having to just put them in an interpolation blender, which you can also do. And then if you are putting them in an interpolation blender to generate some nice little stable diff animations, I would love to work with an animator on it, because it is actually really hard to get it well. And I've managed to speed up a few small clips and get like, 20 or 30 frames that flow. And I'm like, oh, I'm like animating with AI. But I'd love to work with an animator on it and really make like animated shorts that are high quality, and where you're not just limited by what the AI will feed back to you. You can edit anything you want. So I think that applies to games. And I don't think artists are going away. Just like textile workers haven't gone away, right, from the Luddites. I'd love to hear an update from Sasha, and also since Chuck is the new face here, I'd love for him to say hi and introduce himself so he feels welcome.
So, okay, Sasha, you want to go ahead and offer some thoughts on this discussion?
Yeah. So you could, my main thought is that you could break the AI up into different parts of the process. My understanding is that the AI that they used with AlphaGo, when they had an AI that beat a grandmaster at the game Go, they split it up into a couple different parts, where they had a part that was trying to figure out the possible consequences of things, and then they had a part that was scoring the different outcomes and making decisions. So and then the AI where they try to mimic human faces, my understanding is they have an AI that's generating the faces, and then another AI that's trying to distinguish between the AI generated faces and actual human images. And then they kind of pit those AIs against each other. So they say, here's this AI that can discriminate, and they try to train the AI that's generating the faces so that it can fool the AI that's doing the discrimination. And that's how they improve the system. So I'm thinking that you could use those kinds of principles in the interactive storytelling stuff. So you could break the AI up where you have one AI that is trained to generate sequences of events using causal reasoning, and then you could have a different AI that is taking that list of events, or that series of events, and is translating it into a human readable format that actually reads like literature. And then you could have an AI that is taking the output and comparing it to stories like stories of Sherlock Holmes or stories of the Jane Austen stories that you like, things like that, and trying to figure out, well, which stories are the human written stories and which one are the AI written stories. And you could use that to train the AI to do a better job at generating the stories. And you could kind of go back and forth, and over time, I think you could build up an AI that could tell stories a lot more effectively.
That's a fascinating idea.
Yeah.
Breaking it down into subunits and applying the AI at the level of the subunit.
Yeah.
What do you, well, first let's talk to Chuck here. Do you have any overall comments on this discussion, Chuck?
Oh, hi. My tremendous honor to participate, Mr. Crawford. I really admire your work. Your work definitely inspire not only my team here. I'm actually at CES 2023 right now, so I accessed late because I had to move to the convention. Basically, I'm working on the I'm actually using Charisma AI. You probably heard of the program before.
Actually, I haven't, because I don't keep up with
Oh,
you.
okay. Charisma AI is a
I'm gonna look it up.
UK-based AI story engine that uses multiple like TTS, STT, and a logic-based module, data buckets, and things like that. So to help you create a or make a sensation like you're talking to the character and interacting with them, and affect the plot, story plots, and things like that. It's available now. I'm not here to sell it, but I've been looking into many different methods and disciplines, including your approach as well, to how to incorporate, or maybe AI could help do the storytelling. And right now, the companies here are mainly focusing on AI, metaverse, and Web3. They don't believe in metaverse is coming through just yet, but they're trying to bring in some of the functionality and technology into the current state of the internet right now. And we're using generative AI. Basically, you type in a text and it creates images and videos for using a chat or create a content, and then it helps you tell the story. And they're working on this right now. There's several teams, including myself. And we have successfully connected generative animation. Basically, when I type in Chris pushes the door open, then the animation will happen. Our 3D character will push in and make the door open on a 3D scene. So it's very basic level, but I remember when you said the true interactive storytelling is about interacting with the digital character to change the plots, affect the whole storytelling. And I'm a strong believer in that. And I believe the AI is definitely kind of supporting that vision of yours. It's coming along the way. There are small companies and even the bigger companies like ChatGPT. They're working on connecting generative AI, creating images and videos into that space now. So we're probably looking into next 5 years. Maybe we'll start commercialized, starting from emojis to interactive textbook that the users can actually see, the audience can see visuals from the text-based interactions. So it's a very, very exciting field. And in terms of the copyright, which I just jumped in, they're still having a hot discussion here in CES because of imagine Harry Potter. The author only wrote like 3 books, but there are fans who probably wrote like 700,000 books out there, and they can't track them all down for doing a copyright. And it's the current state of how we're in even the low tech standards to track down crack down every copyright. Especially the literature and the movies, other than the music, because the music is somehow you know, it's they have been working on it, all right, but even making a remix or borrowing some beats from some parts, it's you can't track them down, and there's a very vague law about it. And so it's been a hot discussion here on that as well, like who owns what, you know, like using synthesis based on the data of existing pre-existing pre-created materials, who owns it, you know, like there are main discussions here, but I'll keep observe and learn. Hopefully I can share more after. Thank you.
Can you drop a link to your company in the chat?
Oh, my company's link in the chat.
Yeah, so we can check
Okay.
it out.
Gotcha. Okay.
I'd
I'll do
like
that.
to, what you say suggested an idea to me that this might be a big idea. Let's start with something I'm doing, which is in Le Mort d'Arthur. Every time a player makes a move, I record that move. And so as people have been playing it, I've been building up a database of actions. Now, so far, I am using that database exclusively for analytical reasons. That is, I take the data and I munge it over with lots of statistical calculations and graphs and so forth. And I'm using it right now solely with the intent to refine the design. That is one of the things I've done that was very easy to do initially, was in encounters where there were 3 options. If nobody ever chose this option, then clearly this is a waste of time. Throw it away or replace it, but this is a bad design. So I did a lot of, or I am doing that. Another thing I'm doing is tracing the progress of various global variables over the course of the story. And I will use that to meet one of the most common demands is, I need some feedback. And I've already written some feedback encounters, but I haven't enabled them yet, because I'm still trying to characterize what is the normal progress of the evolution of these values. Once I get that in, I can then put in a function that will say, yeah, this guy is really doing a lousy job in this global variable. Let's throw some feedback at him. Actually, this is not a new idea. I remember doing that as far back as the first C-boot in 1987, and I did it even to an even greater extent with Patton versus Rommel in 1990, I believe it was. So the idea of using various global variables as ways of evaluating the progress of the player is not a new one. However, this is what I'm thinking of it in terms of right now. But there's a next step that your comment, Chuck, inspired in me. And that is that we could, suppose we made a system that was more elaborate than Le Mort d'Arthur, that is, that used a dicto style language. That is the kind of iconic language that I use with dicto, with Storytron. And we just, instead of having all the complex analysis, we just create the words and their icons. And we can just create as big a vocabulary as we want. We don't know what they mean. We put that out there as sort of a sandbox game, and we let people play with it. And we build up all the data on what people tend to do with the various words. And if we can get enough data, then we can start inserting artificial characters into the story who respond based on the past data. And if this system advances far enough, we end up with all computer characters. It's one person playing with all the other computer characters. This could actually work. The big question is, can we get enough data? Sasha, you had a comment here. Whoop, no audio.
Thank you. Yeah, so you mentioned that you were taking out some options that no one was choosing. I don't think that's necessarily a good idea. So I do think that when you have an encounter and you have a number of options, the options give the choice context and can add to,
Yes,
it is content. So you can,
the shadow
Even-
defines the light.
yes, exactly. So even if no one's choosing particular options, it changes the feeling of that particular encounter, and it changes the impression that they get from that, and it's going to change how they're thinking about it.
You're right, you're right. Good point. So, Haniel, we haven't heard anything from you. Do you have any thoughts on this discussion?
I think Haniel only communicates through text.
Oh, okay. Haniel. Is it Haniel or Haniel or anybody know? Ah, here we go. Haniel. Okay. Okay. We are out of time here. However, I made a mistake, and on one site I said that this seminar would start at 9:00 a.m. my time. And so I definitely want to hang around for a few minutes to see if anybody shows up. So, but Chris.
Also, before we go, Sasha, can you tell me where we are on JSON saving? Because that's kind of the last piece of tape holding me back.
Yeah. So the trick with Sweepweave is every time I make major changes to how a story world is structured, I have to create kind of a new algorithm for loading that version of the JSON into Sweepweave. And if I make a whole bunch of changes over time, then I have several different algorithms that are all sitting there in the code so that I can load story worlds from several different versions of Sweepweave into the most recent version. So I'm trying to make sure I have everything in place that I want to change before I, turn saving back on and before I finish that up. That's why I haven't, that's why I've temporarily disabled saving projects. But within a couple of weeks, if I don't make any further changes, I could get that implemented and make it so that you could save and load projects.
That's awesome. I'll work on pre-prod. Until then, I appreciate that.
Thank you. I'm really glad people are getting a lot out of Sweepweave.
Well, I mean, it's cool to have somebody being like, push this. So like same day or the same week, I'm going to like use it. It's a little more encouraging, right?
Yeah.
Chris Conley, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that Narrowscope is happening in this summer, and they're still accepting talk topics if anybody wants to propose. This year they're going back to a physical in-person meetup again. This time it's in, I think, University of Pittsburgh, I guess, and so I'm really considering going because it's a lot closer to me in Maryland than Boston was. I went to the first year of it in 2019. I guess, and it was a really great convention. Like, it's focused on, I guess, like interactive fiction, but also about interactive storytelling in general, and just all the various different tools and approaches that are used in games and other media to tell interactive stories.
How can I find out about this?
It's at narrowscope.org.
narrow scope, narrow scope.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I'll go look them up. When is it?
Uh, yeah, let's see. I think it is June 9th through the 11th. So just one weekend. It's
Okay. Okay, I will definitely look that up, see if they, well, see what's going on there.
Yeah, another week to still propose talks.
I
Okay.
had a question for Chris Crawford earlier. You mentioned that Storytron sometimes would contradict itself
Oh,
when,
yes. I'm sorry, I
yeah,
failed.
right.
Poor phrasing. Rather, what I mean is you would get one verb, taking place, an event, and then 2 steps later, the character would do something completely inconsistent with that because they're reacting to only the one immediately preceding it. Now, Storytron did have a capability to look at history, and so presumably that wouldn't happen. The problem was there were so many cases where an event here would subtly affect, in dramatic terms, affect an event a short while later, but it was difficult to anticipate that. And so by failing to anticipate that, we produced the technology, the algorithms produced a decision that really wasn't quite right for that. So
I feel like your solution that you had there worked well was to minimize history table lookups and mainly to plug that into the emotion system and just have
Yes.
people keep track of their moods, and that
Yes.
way you could use it as a shorthand, much simpler to author that way.
yes, that was my hope. And in fact, maybe it was just a matter of learning how to use that effectively. Again, Storytron existed for such a short time. I developed a lot of expertise with it, but we really needed to develop a lot of stories with it before we understood it. We've got a question here that I want to address immediately, and then we'll come back to you, Craig. Any decision on moving to Slack or some other tool? Right now, the only discussion area that I use is the Thaddeus thing. What is that platform?
I think.
Mindy Networks.
Yes, yeah. Well, yes, that's right. That's right. And they have changed their structure in ways that I find just make it harder to use and less useful in terms of structuring the information. And so the question is, well, are there any other options? And in fact, there have been many suggestions. The most likely one would be Slack. However, Slack tends to have it tends to be a little chaotic. So
I'd recommend Discord because a lot of us already have Discord up and we're in a bunch of servers. And yeah, there you go.
Craig has a strong negative reaction.
Yeah, no, I'm on enough Discord servers, and the mark
It's a
all
lot,
read is a very handy feature, and unfortunately I feel I would use that an awful lot.
Sure.
I mean, it's funny because like the interface and approach and even the markup language and everything that they use in Slack and Discord, they almost seem identical to me. And I'm not sure why Discord took off and Slack has died.
I think the reason why is you can toggle between different groups easily. I think it's that simple. And then also because it was targeting a younger demo and that was more for fun. And then when you're in a project space, it's like the reason I started using it in 2017 for work was that it felt like I was a proper indie cypherpunk type dude and not some corporate consulting, lackey guy, right? And also I couldn't keep track of having different tabs with the Slack. So I'll Slack will drop me, but I mean, Discord's on my desktop. Also, I'm a little old school. I like a desktop client, you know, and then it's like, it's more
I'm in
embedded,
IRC,
it's
so
deeper.
I know your feelings completely on that.
Well, yeah, that's maybe too rustic.
It's
But
very
yeah.
Baroque, yeah.
Okay, I'd like to go through the group and have each person suggest their preferred platform for discussion. So, Craig, I'm going to start with you. What's your preferred? What do you recommend?
So the one that I recommend is Discourse, because it does have some of that forum feeling to it. I see Chris scrunching his nose up. It does tend to be a little more slow and a little more staid, but if I were pushed, I would very much go with Slack. The only downside of it is that in order to get your history, you have to pay for it. And so they do tend to lock a lot of things behind, hey, this is great, however, you need to pay for it.
Yeah.
Discord tends to be a little more noisy about how it wants you to pay for things with Nitro and all the other wonderful things that it has in there. That said, I mean, push come to shove, either any one of those platforms would be okay, in my opinion.
Okay, let me suggest a very weak alternative, and that would be the Facebook group, which is, yeah, I'm not-
Non-starter for me,
yeah,
sorry.
but I want to put it on the ballot here. So, Patrick, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, I think Discord, and then also it would be like good for, if any of us are on Twitter, we can get some sort of interactive storytelling Twitter going, not as a formal group. It's more just a collation of people, but that would be that because that makes you like somebody, and then you can get in a blog or a BuzzFeed article, and it's a story about what somebody said on Twitter. Here's the tweet. I'm telling you, this is how things are these days. Don't ask me why culture works this way, but yeah. Is anybody on Twitter? Just out of curiosity.
I am, but I mostly just use it to read. I almost never write anything.
Oh, okay.
I've got
Yeah, so Discord would be my vote.
Several. Is Discord the same thing as discourse?
Completely
No.
different. That's
Completely different.
Okay, there are two different things there.
Yes.
Okay,
Thank you, Greeks, for the right root word, you know.
yeah. Okay, Chris Conley, what do you recommend?
I guess out of the set that everybody said, I would say Discord. Like I know at least a couple forums where I'm more or less active on which use Discourse. And the idea there is basically taking the old Web 1.0 forum style approach with like threaded conversations, and just it kind of layers some Web 2.0 features on top of that, like infinite scrolling and kind of like the reply is in its own frame, kind of just some niceties, but I don't know, I just don't really like the approach and how it does things. I guess like if I want a Web 1.0 forum experience, I just use a Web 1.0 forum.
Okay, so you're recommending Discord?
Yeah, it's like the least bad option, I think.
Okay. Let's see. Sasha?
I very much don't want to use Facebook.
Okay.
I really like PHP BB. I guess that's a Web 1.0 type thing.
What Seabit originally used.
Yeah, I just checked the PHP BB website, and it looks like they have some recent updates. So that's free to use. You know, you have to have like a website up, but if you have a website up, then you can use that software for free, and it has nice threading and different categories for different types of threads and things like that. So I really I think that would probably be my favorite. I also like the idea of using Reddit. I like the style of the structure of Reddit, where you have you can add a flair to particular topics to kind of categorize them. It's free to use. You don't have to pay to see older posts or anything like that. You can reply to particular comments and create neat little threads like that. So I like the idea of Reddit. That'd probably be my second choice. I think I haven't used Discourse. If it's open source, I do like open source software quite a bit. So that could be cool. I'd be cool with Slack. I'd be cool with Discord. I'd be cool with sticking with Mighty Networks. But probably PHPBB would be my first choice.
Okay. Chuck?
I will just follow the majority because I'm back in Korea. It's really hard to access on the meeting time every time, so that's why I'm missing out every time. But I'll just follow the majority choices. But definitely not a fan of Facebook because it's I would say symbolically what you guys are doing is it's like off platform, out of this world type of thing. So I don't think centralizing it or even putting a data of your conversation on that platform is not I would rather try to go with Discord or Reddit. But however, some of your conversation that you guys have on there is it's definitely encyclopedia worthy, Wikipedia worthy, and I wish there was a forum channel that you could archive some stuff so people can search in later. You know, yeah, because it's definitely invaluable stuff that you guys are talking about.
Yeah.
That's one thing I thought of as well. I absolutely want the post history and the conversation history from Thaddeus to be saved and archived somehow. I don't know.
One thing that's nice about Discord, it is harder to index things, although you theoretically can search, but you can subdivide in channels. So there are trade-offs there. But I think the best thing for it is we could actually use the mystique of us being these like foundational visionary artists, having these conversations in some channels that maybe are like admin filtered, you know, so only like a handful of us can do it. And then we got some other channels, and now Chuck's got a product. Somebody did an experiment, so here's the channel for that. If you want to prompt that API, you can do it. So that blends in. So we actually copy. Now a lot of people complain about Midjourney being a Discord bot, which is why I think Chris didn't really get into using it directly. You prefer DALL-E because it's a simpler interface. You don't have to like learn Discord and type in the slash and whatnot. But anyway, I got around that. It does work really well for marketing, and we want to lead gen a general pool of super fans who would be supportive of our work, and who, you know, new artists will emerge from among them as well. But really, it is like a problem that we've all kind of procrastinated on for like a long time, or we outsource it at you know, as we discussed last time, which is a trade-off you can make. But like it would be cool if we could maybe even have a 500 or 1,000 people get into the group. I'm not saying 1 million, right? But even 500 or 1,000 people who actually like this kind of content would be good energy. And it might take a year or two to roll that up, but you know, this is a way to do it.
Okay. We had no new people show up, so I think we can close out the discussion. And it looks like Discord is the favorite here. So I'm going to explore that with the intention of making Discord our site. I may ask you for help, Craig, in getting.
I was just going to offer it.
Yeah, getting the ideal structure, because you know, when I plunged into Mighty Networks and set up the structure for Thaddeus, I didn't quite know what I was doing, and I don't think I achieved the ideal structure. So let's try to make a better job of it with Discord. So thank you very much. And any last comments?
I have another suggestion. Someone mentioned having trouble seeing when the Zoom meetings are going to be. Maybe, Chris, if you could have a page on erasmataz.com that's just kind of a private page that just announces this is when the meeting is.
Okay,
Yeah, it wouldn't have to be available for like the entire internet to see, but just, people that you're interested in inviting to the meeting. That way, if they can't get into Discord or they can't get into Thaddeus or whatever it is, they definitely be able to see your post on your site.
well, I have.
I also think we should have more of a YouTube presence. So like these videos being uploaded might be cool. And some Let's Plays, like I asked about that. And I think we're getting to the point where we could do a Let's Play video of LMD and Chris Conley, I think you should do some for your games as well, or someone else could do them. But yeah, that's how people experience video games now. They go and, oh yeah, that looks like a good game. Here's someone playing the entire duration of it. But it's all content that gets exposure.
One thing I would,
Oh, go ahead.
oh, sorry. One thing I would like to suggest, I don't know if you use Google Calendar at all, but there is a way to create a calendar link that can be shared out with folks so that you get an ICS file, or ICS link, I should say, which is a calendar format that can be imported into other people's calendaring applications. So that could be one way of having those meetings show up. And
Well, here's a radical idea. What if I were to collect, if each of you were to give me your email address, and then I put those email addresses in a list, and then send out an email to everybody on the list. What do you
the
think?
mailing list.
Yeah.
You
I've
could argue
heard
you're
about
even
those.
serving the emails,
Graham?
like in the manner of a waitress, perhaps.
Actually, I think a mailing list would be the easiest, the simplest approach for everybody, because that way
Yeah,
I put it out and you don't have to go look it up.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
I'm going to ask each of you to send me an email. If you don't have my email address, it is here. There. So send me an email and I will put you on the list.
That sounds great.
So, okay then. Well, this has been a great discussion, and I'll see you guys next month. I'm probably going to want to talk about what I've learned on the feedback from Lemort d'Artour from all this statistical analysis. I think there's some interesting material there that would apply to other projects. So
I'm going to also start making a spreadsheet, and I'd like you to collaborate with me on that in order to index all the encounters and their associated images, and possibly other columns for alt images that were near misses or what have you, just for reference. Yeah.
Okay, very good. I will see you guys next month.
thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Nice chat. Bye.